In a quiet corner of the countryside, there lived a gentle widow named Margaret. Her small home was nestled amidst rows of vibrant apple trees, each one blooming with the promise of sweet, juicy fruit. Margaret had spent many years tending to her orchard, her fingers often stained with the rich soil and her heart filled with joy at the sight of her beloved trees swaying in the breeze. Every spring, as the flowers began to blossom, Margaret would wander through her orchard, humming softly to herself. She believed that each tree had its own personality, some were lively and full of energy, while others stood tall and proud, almost like guardians watching over her. Margaret would chat with them as she pruned and watered, sharing stories of her life and dreams. Even though she lived alone after losing her husband years ago, the orchard felt alive with memories. The laughter they shared during harvest seasons echoed in her mind like a sweet melody. It was a peaceful life, filled with simple joys like the morning sun filtering through the leaves and the sound of rustling branches. However, as much as she cherished this serene existence, little did she know that it was about to be disrupted. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, both literally and figuratively, as a new chapter awaited in her life. That fateful day would challenge not just her love for her orchard but also her very spirit. One afternoon, as Margaret was busy pruning the trees, she heard a rustling sound coming from the edge of her orchard. Curious, she paused and turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows. It was a man, his clothes torn and dirty, and his face gaunt, reflecting the signs of desperation and hunger. He looked like he hadn't eaten for days, which tugged at Margaret's heartstrings. Slowly, he approached her, his eyes wide with both fear and hope. "Please," he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm starving." Margaret could see that he was a bandit, likely escaping from something or someone, but at that moment, all she could think about was the sorrow in his eyes. After years of caring for her trees and watching them grow strong, she felt a deep surge of compassion for the man before her. Was it right to judge him solely by his appearance? In that moment, she made a choice, one that would change her life forever. She reached into her basket, plucking one of the ripest apples from her harvest. The fruit gleamed in the sunlight, its bright red skin a stark contrast to the bandit's weary face. "Here," she said softly, offering it to him with a steady hand. "Take this. It should help." The bandit's expression changed from despair to disbelief as he accepted the apple, clutching it as if it were treasure. Little did they both know that this act of kindness would set off a chain of events neither could foresee. As Margaret watched the bandit accept the apple, her heart swelled with a mix of concern and empathy. She could see how much he needed it, and in that moment, her own struggles seemed to fade away. Life had not always been easy for her after losing her husband, but she knew what it felt like to be alone and hungry for not just food, but also hope. Margaret glanced at the rows of apples surrounding her, each one representing the hard work and love she had poured into her orchard. Although she relied on these trees for sustenance, she couldn't ignore the desperate look in the bandit's eyes. It reminded her of the times when she also felt lost, searching for a glimmer of kindness in a tough world. "Take your time," she encouraged him gently, watching as he took a bite of the apple. The juice dripped down his chin, and for a moment, the weariness in his eyes was replaced by surprise and relief. It was a simple act, but it brought them both a moment of peace amid their ongoing struggles. Margaret felt a warmth spreading through her chest. This small act of generosity was more than just sharing food, it was a connection forged in vulnerability. She realized that even in her own hardship, there was strength in kindness. As the bandit nibbled on the apple, an unspoken understanding passed between them, hinting at the unexpected bond they would share in the days to come. Just as the warmth of their connection began to settle in, a loud commotion erupted at the edge of the orchard. Margaret's heart sank as she turned to see a group of local deputies marching toward her, their faces set in hard lines of anger. She immediately understood that they were here because of the bandit. The air around her thickened with tension, and she could feel her pulse racing. "What's going on here?" one of the deputies barked, scanning the scene with a scowl. The bandit froze, fear flashing in his eyes, while Margaret instinctively stepped in front of him, protective and defiant. "This is my orchard," she said firmly, trying to keep her voice steady. "He means no harm." The deputies exchanged irritated glances before one of them sneered, "Means no harm? He's a thief. He shouldn't be here." Their voices grew louder, echoing through the trees as they advanced. Margaret felt her heart race as they continued to threaten the bandit. "If you don't get rid of him now," another deputy warned, "we'll burn this place down. We'll tie your trees and make sure you lose everything." Worry clenched around Margaret's chest as she looked at her beloved trees, memories flooding back. They were not just trees, they were symbols of love and care from her past. The stakes had risen high, and she knew she had to act quickly to protect both the man who needed her help and the orchard that represented her life's work. As the tension in the air thickened, Margaret felt a storm brewing inside her. Her heart waged a war between two powerful emotions, the fierce love she held for her orchard and the compassion she felt for the starving man standing behind her. Each tree was a testament to her hard work and the memories of her late husband, who had shared every spring and harvest with her. The thought of losing them brought tears to her eyes. But then there was the bandit, a person in desperate need, looking dejected and frightened. Could she really turn him over to the deputies, knowing they would treat him harshly? His vulnerability reminded her of how lonely and lost she'd felt at times in her life. She had been lucky, she had her trees, but he had nothing. Margaret could already hear the deputies' threats echoing in her mind: if she protected the bandit, her orchard would be burned to the ground. The fear of losing everything clung to her like a weight. Yet, what kind of woman would she be if she let fear dictate her actions? Taking a deep breath, Margaret's heart settled on one truth: kindness should prevail over injustice. She had spent years nurturing life, it felt wrong to abandon someone in need now. With a steely resolve igniting within her, she prepared to confront the deputies again, not just for herself or for the bandit but for what was right. With her heart pounding, Margaret stepped forward to face the deputies, her resolve hardening like the trunk of one of her strong apple trees. "You will not harm him," she declared, her voice steady despite the tremor underneath. The deputies looked taken aback by her boldness, but anger quickly replaced their surprise. "Are you really going to defend a thief?" one of them spat, crossing his arms over his chest. "This man could be dangerous." Margaret swallowed hard but pressed on. "He is not dangerous, he is hungry and desperate. I showed him kindness when he needed it most." She gestured toward the bandit, who stood silently behind her, his eyes wide with fear and gratitude. "If you burn my orchard, you will destroy everything I have worked for, everything my late husband and I cherished together. These trees are my life, but they also represent hope and compassion." Her voice started to break, but she took a deep breath to regain her composure. "You may see him only as a criminal," she continued, "but I see a fellow human being who deserves mercy." The other deputies shifted uncomfortably at her words, a glimmer of uncertainty flickering in their hardened expressions. Margaret fought to keep her emotions in check as she sensed the weight of silence envelop the scene. This was not merely about saving her orchard, it was about standing up for what was right. In that moment of courage, she realized the power of her voice could sway not just the deputies but maybe even change hearts along the way. As the confrontation unfolded, the bandit stood silently behind Margaret, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. He felt a surge of guilt as he watched her bravely defend him, knowing that her orchard and everything she cherished were now at risk because of his presence. The thought that a kind woman would put herself in danger for someone like him weighed heavily on his conscience. "Why would she help me?" he thought, feeling unworthy of her compassion. All his life, he had been cast as a villain, driven to desperate actions out of hunger and despair. Now, faced with the reality of his situation, he could see the goodness in Margaret's heart and felt a deep gratitude blossoming within him. It was a foreign feeling, a flicker of hope that perhaps not everyone saw him as just a thief. Yet, the guilt gnawed at him. Her brave stand could lead to the destruction of her beloved trees, a sanctuary of memories and love. "What kind of man am I?" he pondered, grappling with the knowledge that his actions had led to this moment of crisis for someone who had shown him kindness when he needed it most. The bandit glanced at Margaret's determined face and felt a spark of inspiration. Perhaps he could change. Perhaps he could repay her kindness by finding a way to protect her orchard. With a newfound sense of purpose, he vowed to do whatever it took to ensure that her bravery was not in vain, hoping to forge a better path for himself amid the chaos unfolding around them. As the tension escalated, the atmosphere around the orchard became electric. The deputies, their faces twisted in anger, advanced on Margaret with an air of authority that was hard to ignore. "You've made a grave mistake," one of them shouted, pointing an accusing finger at her. "You think you can shield a criminal from justice? This ends now." Margaret stood her ground, her heart racing but her eyes steady. "I will not let you harm him or destroy my home," she declared, her voice rising above the mounting noise. She could feel the weight of their aggression pressing down on her, but she refused to waver. With each word she spoke, the deputies grew more frustrated. "We warned you," another deputy growled, stepping closer. "If you don't hand him over, we'll burn this orchard to the ground, and you will have no one to blame but yourself." The bandit felt the heat of their threats and the gravity of the situation crushing him like a heavy stone. He knew Margaret was risking everything for his sake, and he could see the resolve etched on her features. Suddenly, he found his voice rising from behind her. "Wait," he called out, stepping forward despite Margaret's attempt to hold him back. "I won't let you hurt her or her trees. This is not just about me, it's about what's right." His declaration hung in the air, creating a shocking silence that momentarily halted the confrontation. This pivotal moment shifted the dynamic, forcing everyone present to grapple with the reality of their choices. As all eyes turned toward the bandit, it became clear that a line had been crossed, one that would shape their fates forever. Word of the confrontation at Margaret's orchard spread quickly through the small town, carried by whispers and worried faces. Neighbors who had known Margaret for years were shocked to hear about the threats against her and the bandit she had tried to help. Many remembered her kindness, how she would share her apple harvest with those less fortunate or lend a hand to anyone in need. As news reached them, townsfolk began to gather outside the orchard, forming a supportive crowd. Friends and acquaintances came with a shared purpose, to stand with Margaret against the deputies. Some brought baskets filled with apples, while others carried signs expressing support. "Save the orchard," read one colorful placard, while another simply said, "Kindness matters." Among them was Tom, a local farmer who often traded goods with Margaret. He stepped forward, his voice booming over the crowd. "Margaret has always been there for us. We will not let anyone destroy her home or her spirit." Encouraged by his words, more neighbors joined in, chanting support for Margaret and calling for justice. The crowd's energy grew palpable as they united behind her cause. This outpouring of community support stirred something deep within the bandit. For the first time in a long while, he felt hope instead of despair. Surrounded by people ready to back Margaret's bravery, he knew that they could stand together against injustice. The bond between the widow and her community strengthened, turning fear into determination and igniting a fire that would not be easily extinguished. As the crowd of supporters surrounded Margaret and the bandit, the tension in the air began to dissipate. The deputies, faced with growing resistance and a unified community, exchanged uncertain glances. It became clear that the town would not stand idly by while injustice threatened one of their own. Slowly, the lead deputy raised his hands, signaling for calm. "Let's talk this through," he said reluctantly, recognizing that confrontation was no longer an option. In a surprising turn of events, the community's outpouring of support prompted discussions between Margaret, the bandit, and the deputies. After much deliberation, a compromise was reached. The bandit would leave town but under the condition that he would not be treated as a criminal. Instead, he would be given a chance to start anew elsewhere with the understanding that kindness should guide their actions. Margaret watched as her orchard remained intact, filled with relief and gratitude. The community's bravery had not only protected her trees but also transformed the bandit's life. He promised to honor Margaret's kindness by seeking redemption and helping others in need on his journey. As the days passed, Margaret reflected on the events that had unfolded. She realized that sometimes it takes a storm to reveal the strength of community and the power of compassion. Her orchard stood as a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in challenging times, bravery and kindness can unite people to create a brighter future together. The bond formed between her and the townsfolk had changed them all for the better, showing that love and support could flourish like her beloved trees, even in adversity.